So we often look at, these really tough disagreements, but what about an agreement that actually worked for decades against the odds?
Right, especially between India and Pakistan.
Exactly. Today we're diving deep into the Indus Waters Treaty. For over half a century, this thing, the IWT, it really stood as a kind of testament to cooperation, even amidst conflict.
Yeah, a crucial framework for managing the Indus River Basin's shared waters.
And it's a massive basin we're talking about.
Oh, absolutely huge. Think about it. Roughly 300 million people, maybe more now, depend on it across both India and Pakistan for their lives, their farms, everything.
Wow. 300 million.
And for Pakistan, well, it's basically the nation's lifeblood. It covers something like 65% of its total drainage area. It's fundamentally important.
And for India. Still significant, I gather.
Very significant, yeah. About 14%, mostly covering states like Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, and Punjab. Key agricultural areas, too.
Okay, so how does this treaty actually work? What's the core idea?
Well, the heart of it is a pretty clear division of the rivers.
Right.
The 6 main rivers of the Indus system were split.
Right. India got control over the 3 eastern rivers. That's the Beas, Ravi, and Sutlej.
Correct. And their average annual flow combined is about 41 billion cubic meters.
Okay, and Pakistan.
Pakistan was allocated the 3 western rivers, the Indus itself, the Jhelum, and the Chenab. And these carry a much larger volume, roughly 99 billion cubic meters annually.
So if you do the math, that's like 30% for India and 70% for Pakistan, roughly.
Pretty much, yeah, around that ratio.
Now, that might sound a bit, lopsided on the surface, doesn't it?
It can seem that way, but it was a really crucial compromise back then. You see, India controlled the upstream areas, the headworks, the dams, the barrages that control water flow.
Ah, right. So they had the geographical advantage.
Exactly. But the treaty recognized Pakistan's overwhelming dependence on the Indus system, especially for its agriculture. So this division was seen as necessary for stability.
Got it. Okay, so our mission today, then, what are we trying to unpack here?
Well, we really want to understand why this treaty has been so significant for so long, but also look at the serious pressures it's facing now,
Especially given recent events.
especially given the unprecedented suspension of the treaty by India on April 23, 2025. That came right after the tragic attack in Pahalgam.
And that suspension is a really big deal, isn't it? The first time since 1960.
The very first time. Think about that this treaty survived multiple actual wars between India and Pakistan. It kept functioning. And now it's on hold.
That's what makes this so interesting and frankly worrying. For decades, people pointed to the IWT as like the gold standard for transboundary water sharing, a global success story.
It really was held up as an example.
Yet in recent years, more arguments, more tension, calls to change it, and now the suspension, it feels like this agreement is caught in, I don't know, a perfect storm.
It certainly feels that way.
Yeah.
And to really grasp how we got here, we need to step back a bit. Look at the history.
Where did the dispute even begin?
It goes right back to 1947, the partition of British India. Suddenly you had this previously unified, massive irrigation system just sliced in two by a new border.
And critically, India ended up controlling those upstream headworks we mentioned, the things that regulate water flow into what became Pakistan.
Precisely. That immediately created, massive anxiety and friction.
I remember reading about something called the Inter-Dominion Accord in 1948. What was that?
That was really just a temporary measure, a stopgap, basically. India agreed to keep supplying water to Pakistani canals in exchange for annual payments. But it wasn't meant to be permanent.
So they needed a long-term solution.
They did, but negotiations stalled quickly. Neither side really wanted to give ground. India had the upstream advantage. Pakistan feared for its agricultural survival. It was a stalemate.
So enter the World Bank. How did they manage to break this deadlock? That sounds almost impossible.
It was their intervention that proved absolutely pivotal. David Lilienthal, he led the Tennessee Valley Authority in the U.S., visited the region.
Right, the TVA guy.
Yeah. He proposed that India and Pakistan should actually work together on developing the whole Indus Basin system. Jointly. And suggested the World Bank could, help bring them together and find funding.
And Eugene Black, who was the World Bank president then, he really pushed this idea forward.
He did. Black was clever. He framed the whole dispute not as a political fight, but as essentially an engineering problem.
Take the politics out, focus on the pipes and dams.
Sort of. The idea was that engineers, they speak a common language, technical solutions. He proposed a working group with engineers from both countries and the bank. It helped lower the temperature a bit.
Sounds maybe a little idealistic given the tensions, but it worked. It led to the 1954 proposal.
It paved the way, yes. After years of talks going nowhere, the World Bank put its own plan on the table in '54. And that plan is basically the core of the treaty we know today.
Which was?
Allocate the eastern rivers, Ravi Sutlej goes fully to India, and the western rivers, Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, fully to Pakistan.
But wait, if Pakistan lost access to the eastern rivers, how would they manage? They relied on those too, right?
Absolutely. So the plan included a massive engineering component, building a whole new network of canals and storage dams inside Pakistan to replace that eastern river water with water from the western rivers.
And who paid for all that? That must have cost a fortune.
It did. It was funded by the Indus Basin Development Fund Agreement. Several countries chipped in: the U.S., U.K., Canada, Australia, others. And importantly, India also contributed a significant amount.
How much did India contribute?
The initial grant was 60,000 pounds sterling. A substantial sum back then.
It's really telling. I read that after the treaty was finally signed in Karachi in 1960, India's Prime Minister Nehru apparently said India had effectively purchased a water settlement.
That quote really captures it, doesn't it? It highlights that India felt it made a significant concession, paid a price, for the sake of a lasting agreement and, hopefully, stability.
Okay, so let's dig into the treaty itself. We know the basic river division, but what about India using the western rivers? The ones allocated to Pakistan. Was that allowed at all?
Yes, but with very specific limitations. The treaty allows India certain uses on the western rivers.
Like what?
Well, limited irrigation is one. India can irrigate up to about 701,000 acres using western river water. And there's a limit on storage for that, about 1.54 billion cubic meters.
Okay, limited irrigation. What else?
Crucially, unlimited non-consumptive uses. Things like generating hydropower, navigation, floating timber. Basically, uses that don't significantly reduce the water flowing downstream.
Hydropower is a big one there, right? India could build dams?
Yes, but again with restrictions. The treaty allows run-of-the-river hydroelectric plants. These typically don't have large reservoirs like storage dams. There are limits on the storage capacity even for these hydro projects, about 2 billion cubic meters for power generation, plus another 0.93 billion for flood control.
Run of the river. We'll probably come back to that term.
Definitely, it's become a major point of contention.
And there was also that 10-year transition period you mentioned earlier. What was that about?
Right, from 1960 to 1970. During that decade, India was obligated to keep supplying water from the eastern rivers to Pakistan's existing canals, the ones that historically relied on that water.
To give Pakistan time to build all that new infrastructure.
Exactly. Time to build the link canals and dams to switch over to the western rivers. And what's truly remarkable, as we said, is that India kept that water flowing even during the 1965 war.
That really underscores the initial strength or commitment behind the treaty.
It does. And India also continued making its payments to that development fund during the war.
Okay. The treaty also set up a body, right? The Permanent Indus Commission, the PIC. What's its job?
The PIC is sort of the engine room of the treaty's day-to-day functioning. It has one commissioner from India and one from Pakistan. They're supposed to meet regularly, at least once a year.
And what do they do in these meetings?
They exchange data river flows, project plans. They discuss any issues that come up, try to cooperate, and resolve disagreements at the first level. It's meant to be the primary channel for communication and problem solving.
But their reports aren't public, you mentioned.
Correct. That adds a layer of confidentiality, maybe aimed at facilitating frank discussion, but it also means there's less public visibility into their work.
So what happens if the PIC can't agree on something? Is there a next step?
Yes, the treaty has a pretty clear multi-stage dispute resolution mechanism.
How does that work?
Well, first, if either country plans some engineering work like a dam that might affect the other, they have to notify them, share the plans and data.
Okay, transparency first.
Then, if there's a disagreement, it's discussed within the PIC. If they can't resolve it, the issue can be classified as either a question or a dispute. Depending on that, it can be referred to a neutral expert.
Oh, what?
A neutral expert. Basically, an independent technical expert appointed to rule on specific disagreements, often related to project design or data.
Okay, and if that doesn't work or if it's a bigger issue?
Then it can go to a court of arbitration, or COA. This is a more formal judicial-style body set up specifically to rule on interpretations of the treaty itself or more complex disputes.
Have these mechanisms actually been used?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There are precedents. The Salal Dam issue back in the 70s was resolved between the two governments, building on PIC discussions. More recently, the Baglahar Dam dispute went to a neutral expert.
In the Kishanganga project.
That went all the way to a court of arbitration. So the mechanisms exist and have been tested, though not always to everyone's satisfaction.
Right. Which seems like a good transition point to the growing scrutiny and the points of friction we see today. Let's start with Pakistan's perspective. What are their main concerns?
Well, a major one revolves around India's dam building, particularly on the Chenab River, which is one of the western rivers allocated to Pakistan.
They're worried India could just turn off the tap or cause floods.
That's the fear. That India could use these dams, even the run-of-the-river ones, to manipulate the flow, either hold back water during crucial planting seasons, or release large amounts causing downstream floods, artificial shortages or floods.
And these run-of-the-river projects specifically, Pakistan has issues with those.
Yes. While they don't store huge amounts of water like traditional dams, Pakistan argues that India's capacity to manage the flow through these projects still gives them leverage. They worry India could hold back water within the permitted pondage limits for hydrogeneration, affecting downstream flows when Pakistan needs it most.
Have they objected to specific designs?
They have. They've raised objections about things like the height of spillway gates on projects like Kishanganga and Baglahar, arguing these designs violate the treaty's technical criteria and give India too much control over water storage and release.
And you mentioned they weren't entirely happy with the rulings from the neutral expert on Baglahar or the Court of Arbitration on Kishanganga.
That's right. There's a feeling in Pakistan that these international bodies, while providing rulings, haven't fully addressed their core concerns about the potential cumulative impact of Indian projects on their water security.
Are there other issues from Pakistan's side?
Yes. Another one they've raised concerns about, interestingly, is something called the Left Bank Outfall Drain, or LBOD. This is a drainage project within Pakistan.
How does that involve India?
Pakistan alleges that this drain discharges saline and polluted water into a channel that eventually flows towards the Rann of Kutch in India, potentially harming the environment there. They argue this violates a specific clause in the treaty, Article 4v10, about preventing undue pollution.
Okay, so quite a few points of concern from Pakistan. Now let's flip it. What's the Indian perspective on all this?
India's main position is that it's acting entirely within its rights under the IWT. They stress that the treaty explicitly allows them to develop hydropower and other non-consumptive uses on the western rivers, subject to the agreed technical criteria.
And they maintain their projects are run-of-the-river.
Yes, they consistently state that their hydro projects are designed as run-of-the-river and will not significantly impede or reduce the overall flow of water reaching Pakistan. They argue the downstream impact is minimal.
Why the emphasis on hydropower?
Well, India emphasizes its growing economy and the huge need for clean energy. Hydropower from these Himalayan rivers is seen as a vital resource. They also talk about the need for water storage for various purposes, including managing floods and ensuring water availability.
And India also points to its own use of the eastern rivers, right? The ones allocated to them.
Absolutely. They highlight what they call their complete utilization efforts for the Beas, Ravi, and Sutlej. They point to projects like the Shaprkhandi Dam, which was completed in 2024 after many delays.
What does that dam do?
It's designed to make better use of the Ravi River's water within India, preventing it from flowing unused into Pakistan. India notes that for years, a significant amount of its allocated share from the eastern rivers, maybe around 5.6 billion cubic meters annually just between Madhopur and the Ravi siphon, was actually flowing across the border unused.
So India is saying, we're now trying to use the water that's rightfully ours under the treaty.
Essentially, yes. Projects like Shaprkhandi, the Makara Patan Barrage, the Ujjed Dam project, these are all part of that effort to maximize the use of their allocated eastern river waters.
The rhetoric can get quite sharp sometimes too, can't it? I recall mentions of potential abrogation.
It can. There have been statements, particularly after security incidents, suggesting that if Pakistan were to, say, target Indian water infrastructure, it would be a fundamental breach of the treaty by Pakistan, potentially leading India to reconsider its own obligations, maybe even abrogate it.
Which brings us closer to the present day. These calls for renegotiation and the very recent developments. Where did the push to renegotiate come from?
Well, even before the official government moves, there was pressure building. The Legislative Assembly in Jammu and Kashmir, for instance, passed resolutions calling for the treaty to be revised or even scrapped. They argued the IWT restricts their ability to develop water resources within their own territory, hindering economic development in J&K. because so many key rivers flowing through it are designated as Western rivers.
And then India's central government acted.
Yes, in January 2023, India sent a formal notice to Pakistan seeking to renegotiate the treaty. They cited Pakistan's actions, particularly regarding the dispute resolution processes for Kishanganga and Rattle projects, as being against the spirit of the treaty and forcing India's hand.
How did Pakistan respond to that?
Pakistan has consistently stated its position that the treaty has served both countries well, and that they want to uphold it as it is. They are wary of opening it up for renegotiation, especially as the lower riparian state.
And all this was happening while those dispute processes, the neutral expert and the Court of Arbitration, were still active.
Exactly. It created a confusing situation. Pakistan had approached the neutral expert for certain issues, while India felt those same issues should be handled differently, possibly by the COA or through bilateral talks. The neutral expert did issue an initial ruling in January 2025, saying they were competent to hear the case.
India had also asked for a review earlier.
Yes, back in September 2024, India formally requested a review of the treaty, while Pakistan, in response, reaffirmed how important the agreement was. So you had these parallel tracks, ongoing disputes, calls for renegotiation, reaffirmations, a lot of diplomatic maneuvering.
And then came the actions on the ground earlier this year. First, the Ravi River flow.
Right. On March 1st, 2025, India effectively stopped the flow of Ravi River water into Pakistan by operationalizing parts of the Chaparkandi project. Again, India framed this as simply utilizing its own share after decades of letting it flow across, but it was a significant practical step.
And then the suspension. April 23rd, 2025.
Yes. Following the terrible terrorist attack in Pahalgam, India took the unprecedented step of formally announcing the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty altogether, citing national security concerns as the primary driver.
A truly seismic shift after 65 years.
Absolutely. It fundamentally changes the landscape.
So we need to think about the wider implications now. This isn't just about India and Pakistan, is it? Climate change, for example, must be a huge factor looming over this.
It's massive. Those Himalayan glaciers that feed the Indus system, they're melting at an accelerating rate. This creates short-term risks of floods, like glacial lake outbursts. But the long-term trend is towards reduced river flows.
Which means less water overall to share.
Exactly. It's going to intensify water stress across the basin, making cooperation harder and potentially increasing the risk of conflicts over dwindling resources. The treaty wasn't designed with this scale of climate impact in mind.
And politics. Domestic politics must play a role too.
Hugely. As analysts like those at the Stimson Center point out, the Indus Basin has become increasingly politicized. Decisions about water could be driven by domestic pressures, nationalist sentiment, or electoral calculations in both countries, which can easily undermine the kind of technical cooperation the treaty envisioned.
What about other players in the region? Does the U.S. have a view? China.
Well, the U.S. has traditionally seen the IWT as a stabilizing factor. They worry that water scarcity could destabilize Pakistan further, which has knock-on effects for regional security and counterterrorism efforts. They'd likely prefer the treaty remain functional.
And China. They're upstream on the Indus too, technically.
China's role is complex. They control the uppermost reaches of the Indus. While they aren't party to the IWT, their own massive dam-building activities on rivers flowing out of Tibet, including tributaries of the Indus system like the Sutlej, are a source of concern for India. Plus, China has huge investments in Pakistan, including hydro projects under CPEC. Their stance on transboundary water sharing generally favors upstream nations, which adds another layer of complexity.
So, given all this climate change, politics, outdated aspects, is there an argument the treaty just needs modernization?
Yes, many experts argue exactly that. The IWT was a product of 1960. It doesn't explicitly address climate change impacts, things like groundwater management, which is now critical, or the huge demographic changes and increased water demands in both countries. An update seems logical, but politically extremely difficult.
And now, with the suspension, what are the potential consequences? Where does this leave India-Pakistan relations, regional stability?
The suspension is, frankly, a major blow. It removes one of the very few remaining channels of cooperation between the two. It introduces enormous uncertainty about future water sharing and significantly raises the potential for increased friction, misunderstanding, and even conflict.
It disrupts that delicate balance that held for so long.
Precisely. That balance, however strained it had become, provided a framework. Its suspension leaves a vacuum, and it's unclear what, if anything, will fill it. it definitely complicates an already very tense relationship.
This has been, well, a really comprehensive look at a complex issue. It's clear the Indus Waters Treaty, this thing that was once, a beacon of cooperation against all odds,
A remarkable achievement for its time.
is now facing unprecedented pressure. Despite its history, its importance for millions, the combination of geopolitics, security crises, and water stress seems to have pushed it past a breaking point, at least for now, with this suspension.
It really forces us, and you listening, to think about a fundamental question. Given this long history, this vital importance, can India and Pakistan find a new way forward? One that addresses the legitimate security concerns that India raised, but also Pakistan's undeniable reliance on these waters.
Or has this suspension marked a permanent shift, a move away from negotiated sharing towards something else, with all the risks it entails for the region?
It's that incredibly difficult balance, isn't it, between national security needs as defined by each state and the absolute imperative of managing shared, life-sustaining resources like water, especially in a changing climate.
A sobering thought to end on. If you want to explore this further, we definitely recommend looking into the broader history of international water law and treaties, digging into the specifics of climate change impacts in South Asia, and of course, keeping up with the evolving dynamics of India-Pakistan relations.
They're all deeply interconnected pieces of this puzzle.